While everyone experiences life differently, we all have one thing in common: time. This differs, however, between every human being. Some have a short time on Earth and others longer. Yet one thing is certain: we all have an expiration date. It is an inevitable universal experience and for many a scary reality. It can also be perceived as the final resting stage for some, where they could reunite with their loved ones that have passed. Regardless, the passing of a loved one always takes a toll on those closest to them. No one is ever truly ready for it. When it happens, we often look around for answers. We try to make sense of something that may not really need an explanation. But that is how we as humans process grief. There are many different universal human experiences that art oftentimes explores and tries to make sense of, one of the biggest being death. Many artists have a fascination with death because it is such a taboo subject and everyone's cultural experience with it varies. This allows for different interpretations of the topic. One example of this is the Gashlycrumb Tinies, a book written by Edward Gorey and published in 1963. The book is a collection of short stories in the form of the ABCs, with each letter chronicling the death of various children. In the book, the author interprets death in a very macabre yet humorous way. Another example of this is the title sequence to 6 Feet Under, designed by Danny Yunt. 6 Feet Under is an early 2000s drama television series that follows the daily lives of the Fisher family, who own and run a funeral home in Los Angeles. The title sequence portrays the process a deceased person goes through from the moment they arrive at the mortician until they're taken to their final resting place. This is in addition to various symbolic metaphors of death. This artwork interprets death as a regular, beautiful part of life. The topic of both of these artworks is death. However, the authors use different artistic techniques and iconography to portray their message. Gashlycrumb Tinies uses rough texture, contrasting values, dark humor, and irony. Through the usage of these elements, death is perceived as whimsical and absurd, while the 6 Feet Under title sequence uses a muted color palette, a mix of dynamic camera angles, symbolic imagery, and contrasting music to portray death in a way that is less negative and more normal.
Edward Gorey was an American writer and illustrator. His works focus on the macabre and gore, accompanied by poetry. One of his most famous works was Gashlycrumb Tinies, a collection of short stories in the form of an alphabet book that illustrates a child for each letter of the alphabet. Each page contains a short story and an illustration where the child is met with a mysterious, tragic, and sudden death. Gashlycrumb Tinies reminisces the Victoria era. During this era, mortality rates were tremendously high. The main causes of death were infectious diseases such as smallpox, cholera, and tuberculosis, as well as other factors such as poor sanitation, dangerous working conditions, opiate overdoses from medical uses, and arsenic poisoning from green-colored pigments used in food, textiles, medicine, and other household goods. Gashlycrumb Tinies uses Victorian elements to explore the themes of death to create a playful and whimsical narrative. Gashlycrumb Tinies uses the mediums of pen and ink to create the illustrations for each page of the book. Two main artistic techniques are applied throughout the composition: hatching and cross-hatching. Such techniques allows for the creation of the principles of art and design. Through the use of fine lines within the hatching and cross-hatching techniques, the artist is able to create diverse values of black. Gorey strategically used these techniques to create different values, leading to the appearance of death. We can also see how the artist utilizes negative space to allow for a high contrast composition. Texture is also achieved with hatching and cross-hatching techniques. The artist created different textures such as textiles, wood, water, and fur. We can appreciate some movement within the curved lines of some compositions. However, most of the compositions lack movement and are static. The artist uses narrative techniques such as dark humor. This can be seen through juxtaposition across the tragic death in contrast to the corresponding whimsical illustration. The narrative also employs irony through the usage of absurd scenarios. This can be seen in S is for Susan, who perished of fits. This narrative, just like many others within the book, allows for dark humor, because we recognize the cause of death as impossible. Another important element within Gashlycrumb Tinies is the mystery. Some things are better left unsaid.
In illustrating a horror story, you obviously cannot illustrate what's horrible.
No.
And I can remember I once did a whole anthology of horror stories, and by the time I was through, I was practically faint on the floor because I couldn't, I was trying so hard to avoid, giving anything away, so that you could usually only illustrate the first couple of pages before the story got going.
That's right. If you do the telltale heart and show the man under the floor, then there's no use reading the story. Or so
there's no use reading the story.
Now we've spoiled it for a number of people.
Right, yes.
Gashlycrumb Tinies is meticulously designed to represent its message through the use of semiotics. Gory uses different indexes to represent death. These serve as a transportation tool to the message. He uses indexes as signifiers of death to keep his audience entertained and the cause of death open to one's imagination. This can be observed in H is for Hector, done in by a thorn. The artist uses the index of the hands with the rag to indicate Hector's end. However, we cannot see his exact death, but with the use of the index we can imagine it. Another index can be observed in K is for Kate, who was struck with an ox. Contrary to Hector's death, we can actually see the ghastly way that Kate departed. The index here is the ox because it represents the exact medium that caused her death. Through the use of the ox, Gory is able to create dramatic effect. The usage of semiotics can be seen all throughout Gashlycrumb Tinies. These help the reader understand Gory's message, as death being whimsical and absurd, because it does not align with reality. By doing so, the reader can remove themselves from any emotional connection to the imagery. Gashlycrumb Tinies is not your typical ABC book with cute illustrations and bunnies. Gashlycrumb Tinies is designed as mana, most advanced, not acceptable. Due to its very gothic style of illustration and gory concept, the book can be perceived as not acceptable. However, Edward Gorey stayed true to himself and designed Gashlycrumb Tinies, breaking out of cliches and social standards. By doing so, he was able to inspire the right audience and many artists of the same aesthetic.
Why do people have to die?
To make life important.
6 Feet Under, produced by Alan Ball, is a drama television series from 2001 released by HBO, which set the standard for many television series to follow. It tackled many sensitive topics such as death, LGBTQ topics, sex, and addiction, and for that was truly ahead of its time. The writers and directors went places other shows were afraid to go. Critics praised 6 Feet Under for its unsettling yet powerfully humane explorations of life and death. Apart from the show itself, the title sequence by Danny Yunt was another revolutionary piece of the show for its time. Instead of laying out the story, it uses a series of images that evoke certain feelings and set the tone for the show. Right from the beginning, the sky is shown, but in a muted blue, panning down to an open grass field that is not very vibrant. This kind of muted color palette carries throughout the title sequence to communicate the somberness that comes with death. The usage of camera angles is one thing that sets the sequence apart from others during the time of its release. Each frame tells a message relating to the overall theme, and they flow from one to the next. Danny Yunt uses close-ups of everyday objects to show them in a new light, and give a sense of intimacy. Close-up shots of beakers and embalming fluid invite the viewer into a deeper look at the preparation process a mortician takes, from cleaning the hands, to wheeling the body to their work area, and finally, transporting the casket to its final destination. Each shot also provides different points of view. The shots of the sky can be seen as loved ones of the deceased looking for answers. We also see the point of view of the deceased being rolled down the hall, and again from the inside of the hearse. Throughout the 6 Feet Under title sequence, we see various signifiers that communicate different aspects of death. One of the first being the two clasped hands in the beginning that then let go of each other to visualize the separation that occurs when losing a loved one. One quick shot features a black figure at the end of a hallway in front of a bright light. The figure then quickly fades away as the body is being rolled down the hall, which signifies the person's departure from their human body. In relation to dynamic camera work, flowers are shown in a vase that then quickly wilt away, which signifies the passage of time and the delicate nature of life. Also featured throughout is a crow, which in many cultures signifies death or the afterlife. Lastly, the way the title is displayed at the end, accompanied by a lone tree on a hill. The trunk of the tree becomes a line going down in the ground to form a box that holds the title of the show, the box being a minimalist representation of a casket. In contrast to the imagery and the message being communicated, the music that accompanies is somewhat lighthearted. It brings a sense of normality to such a heavy subject. The music is what drove the direction Danny Yunt took with his overall design. He says in an interview, "When I first heard the music, it sounded to me like someone working." Together, the music and visuals really drive home the message that death is a normal part of life and there is beauty in it.
The lasting significance of both of these artworks is evident in society, to each their own merit. 6 Feet Under tackled many sensitive topics for its time. It was a shockingly accurate depiction of death from the perspective of a regular working class individual. The title sequence by Danny Yunt was a turning point for title design and set a standard for many to follow. While Gashlycrumb Tinies explored death as whimsical and absurd during a time when it was considered taboo and unacceptable. Edward Gorey also opened doors for many artists to follow in his footsteps, providing us with new gothic styles and whimsical storytelling.